Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Beekeeping for Newbies. Thank you so very much for taking the time to listen. I do appreciate you. As always, feel free to reach out, Jeff at beekeepingfornewbies.com. Welcome, folks. We got Bee Buzz episode 20 today. This is going to be the first day. That was great. This is the first day that we're going live with some video as well. And I just basically slobbered and drew all over myself for a couple of seconds. So that's going to be awesome on video. Well, we're going to jump right in and we're going to start off with a couple of thank yous. So the folks out in Barbados, we've been number 1 and number 2 in Barbados for, I think it's been like 2 or 3 weeks now. So special thanks to all you folks out there. Last week or the week before, I think we came up number 2 in Greece, number 2 in Latvia, number 13 in Norway, and number 13 in Italy. So special thanks to all of you out there who are taking the time to listen. I definitely appreciate it. And I hope you're enjoying things and having some fun. Feel free to join us over in the Discord room. If you go to beekeepingfornewbies.com, that's NEWBEES.com. We've got a link about halfway down. Ooh, no, we moved it. I think it's near the top. So we got a link to the Discord page, other info on there on the podcast, how to get a hold of us, all that kind of good stuff. All right, so we're going to jump right in today. We've got a discussion that took place in the Discord room. And so this is 100% not saying anything at all bad about the person who posted this, but there was a gal who said, hey, got an issue with my colony. They've swarmed. I'm queenless now. And so I said, hey, do you have a mentor? And she said, yeah, a coworker of mine's kind of been mentoring me. And, she recommended just checking the bees out once every 5 to 6 weeks, because that's all that she does. And as soon as I read that, I could feel like the fire in my face. I could just feel my face getting red and the frustration, because that is incredibly irresponsible behavior from somebody who's trying to keep honeybees, even as a hobbyist. It's kind of almost worse as a hobbyist, because you're not accountable to anybody. You're just hanging out at the house by yourself, keeping bees. And I really want to believe that this was 100% out of ignorance. I want to believe that this gal just really didn't know about what she was kind of doing with her inaction or her failure to act. But, honeybees are very social creatures. Drones are going to congregate in drone mating areas when they're looking for virgin queens. They're going to be around one another. Workers will socialize around areas where they're foraging. They're interacting with each other in passing. So there's a high probability of them passing varroa mites from one bee to another. If you're not taking care of your bees, you're not keeping an eye on them, there is a very strong possibility and probability that things that are going on inside that colony can be very bad. You could have foul brood. You could have varroa mites getting crazy. You could have any number of things going on in there that are bad, and you're not going to know about it. You can have hive beetles running rampant, laying eggs all through your brood. I mean, a lot of things could be going on, and you don't know because you're not even looking. So when I responded to this message, I probably was a little bit harsh, to which I kind of apologize for. But I think I said something to the effect of, my first advice in this situation is to never listen to a single word that comes out of that person's mouth ever again. I know that was a little bit tough, and I should have specified, around beekeeping. I'm sure she's super knowledgeable in other things, but don't listen to what that person is saying about beekeeping. We talked about varroa and some of the issues with that and what that would pose if this ends up being a big varroa bomb because they're not maintaining their colonies. We saw what happened with this young lady where her colony swarmed, again, because she was getting bad advice. And you hear me say this all the time. When you ask a question, go to me and say, hey, Jeff, what do you think about this? Then go ask 8 or 10 other people. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Ask a lot of questions and try to find a consensus somewhere. Now, you'll get to a point where you find people that you have found that their information is incredibly accurate over and over again. You probably are just going to stick with them. Me, I'm pretty transparent about the way that I do it. If I don't have the answer, I don't know the answer, or I have to take a guess, I'm going to tell you, hey, I'm kind of guessing here, but I think this. Or I say, oh, no, you definitely want to go this route or that route. But this whole thing was just really frustrating. Okay, so I had to get that one out of the way. The first subject I wanted to talk about that is not Discord related, but it's actually a go back to a previous episode. We had a bunch of questions that came through. There were a couple of things I needed to follow up on. So I'm going to hit these follow-up items. We'll knock these out and we'll kind of keep trucking along. The first question is, can you use OA pads with honey supers on? Right? We know that the USDA has approved OA, oxalic acid, for use with Honey Supers on as a vapor. But what I did was I reached out. I figured that the most common sense approach here would be to reach out to a good reputable source, like a governing body who would be the ones who give the final go ahead on this. So the USDA still has it posted under the oxalic acid facts, the frequently asked questions, that OA is not to be used at all while Honey Supers are on. But this definitely was not what I heard. So I started digging around and doing some research. And what it is they haven't updated that frequently asked question page since March of 2021. So that's why we have that issue. Okay, but an important little tidbit here, a little fact. The approval of oxalic acid for any and all OA, their approval of OA is not for any and all oxalic acid. It is a specified brand called Apabioxol. It's the same product that you would get anywhere else, but that's the one that went through the testing and validation. So if someone, wanted to give you a hard time about it, you could just be like, yeah, I'm using Apabioxol or whatever. That's between you and them. Anyway, another follow-up, the next one is on a video of cell builders and grafting. Somebody had asked about if we can get that done. I'm definitely putting that on my calendar for like April of next year. I'm going to go ahead and set up a cell builder. The grafting, I will walk through the entire process next spring. I'm going to put that onto the calendar probably for like late April of 25. The next one, a video on the newspaper method. This was something that was asked a long time ago, and it's on my list, and I will, like I said, I'm going to keep mentioning it until it's done. As I've told everybody before, I'm not a huge fan or proponent of the newspaper method. I can see scenarios where it probably makes sense, but 99% of the time for me, it doesn't. I've never used it before. I've never had an issue before. But where I tend to do it is, I'm smoking and merging things together. For example, if you made a nuke, so you would take frames that have honeybees on them from one colony and you're smoking them and you're moving them into another colony to form a new colony. You may have a 5-frame nuke that has 4 frames of brood, and each of those brood frames came from a completely different colony. But it can be a little bit more complex sometimes when you're dealing with really, really large colonies and they're pretty passionate about their queen. The real trick with some of these things is to make one of the colonies hopelessly queenless, or if they're both queened colonies, there are some people that say we're going to put them together, we're going to let them fight it out. And that's just the way they do it. I don't have enough experience in that specific space to say whether or not that's a good idea. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, why would you run the risk of one queen becoming injured during that fight while she kills the other one? But there are some really great, reputable beekeepers who just do it. And they're like, yeah, it's no big deal. We'll let them figure it out. So that is an approach you can take. Like I said, I don't use the newspaper method, but people have asked about it. I will do a video showing how it's done. Even if it's just a video with hardware where I show you what needs to be done, I label the boxes, colony 1, colony 2, or whatever. We're going to make it happen. Okay, next question. I repeatedly, this isn't actually a question. This is just me. These are all of my things that I say that are wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and just put them out. I recognize that there is a difference between a hive and a colony. Somebody actually asked me, hey, what's the difference on this one? It's 100% my fault because I use them interchangeably. A hive is a physical box in which you put honeybees. A colony is the bees, the honeybees with the queen that make up that go into that hive. So you have a group of bees, workers, drones, queen, that's your colony. So colony is the bees, hive is the hardware. The next thing that I'm crazy notorious for is the queen is in a queen cell. And as she finishes her final development as a pupa, she then becomes a queen. She emerges as a queen all the time, I say. And then the queen was born, and then the queen will be born. And I say it a lot. There is no live birth. The queen is not a mammal. I recognize this. I just say born, and I have forever. So if you hear me say that a queen is born, nobody's in labor. There's no epidural. It's just a regular pupa becoming a queen, emerging from the cell. The next one on things that I say that are wrong. I always say larva as if it can be plural. Like there is a larva. Look at all the larva. Technically it's larva, L-A-R-V-A is a single larva. Larvae, Larvae, is plural larvae. I use those interchangeably. Sorry. Okay, let's see. Oh, I did mess up. I was going back through. I went through a Bee Buzz episode. I don't remember which one it was. I don't have that in my notes. But in that episode, I said species of honeybee. And this is something that I screwed up for years. I really think I kind of only recently figured this one out. But when we talk about bees like a Carniolan or an Italian or a Buckfast, Saskatraz, whatever, that's actually a race of a bee, not a species. So you think about, you have all people walking around the earth. They may be Middle Eastern, African, European, whatever. That would be like the race of the person versus the species. So I messed that up again. I apologize. I have another one here where I say that we need to review what to do when comb is built over wax foundation and not on it. I think that my explanation in Bee Buzz episode 19, it wasn't that great. I used comb and foundation interchangeably a couple of times, which can definitely be confusing. I also said drawing wax several times versus drawing comb. I have no idea why I did that, but I will do an actual video on this because I have some comb that I call like wonky comb. But what happened is I've got a colony right now. It's a small nuke, and they were part of a captured swarm, and they had comb that was actually built underneath of the swarm trap. I cut it off. I stuck it up into the frame, which right there, I should have done it right from the beginning. I just didn't have a blank, empty frame with me with no foundation that I could rubber band it into. So I just stuck it up against a frame. And as they continued to build it out, it is actually hanging down from the frame. So when I did an inspection the other day, I was holding the frame in my hand and I was looking at everything. And then I went to flip it over to look on the other side, and the entire section of comb was like dangling down. And I was really, really concerned because that was a frame that had a lot of eggs and young larvae on it. And I think it's entirely possible that the queen could have been hiding behind that comb. I have not yet inspected because the weather's just been stinking hot. I had to self-censor there. It's been crazy hot the past couple of days, and I didn't want to put the bee suit on. I need to get out there today or tomorrow and make that happen. But yeah, I'm going to do a video on exactly how to go through and how to make sure that we take that comb that's been drawn in a not so great way and get that fixed into a blank frame. So we'll get that video out here in the next couple of weeks. It's already on my to-do list. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to jump right into the questions that came out of the Discord room. Question 1, what is the difference between a good vaporizer and a bad vaporizer for oxalic acid? The person said, in the Mite podcast, I heard you say to be wary of the cheaper ones, but was curious how to know if mine is adequate or not. So the answer I gave would be to, check the reviews out, ask around, ask anybody that you know, ask questions in the Discord room, ask if anybody has seen that model. I don't really know of a great way to say, what to look for features. Unfortunately, I can't tell you. I think there are some of them that are really cheaply manufactured in different parts of the world, and they fail pretty easily. I know there are 12-volt versions that, you clip on with little clamps, so you hook onto an external battery. I've used those for years before I got my fancy DeWalt battery one that runs off of 18-volt. I almost want to say you get what you pay for, but even that, like mine was $500. I mean, that was a lot of money, and it works, but man, it doesn't feel like a $500 piece of product to me. But anyway, so yeah, I don't have a great answer for you. I mean, you're gonna have to ask around, check reviews. And like I say, if you're looking at one specifically and you're not sure, shoot me an email, post it in the Discord. I'll take a look at it and see if I can track down some info for you. Okay, question 2. If you catch a swarm, can you put it next to an existing active colony without any issues? So the thing that primarily comes to mind, there's 2 things that come to mind for this. Number 1, I think about disease. So you have a swarm that is of an unknown source and you don't know anything about them. So I think the first thing I would say is leave them where they are. Let them kind of settle for a week or so. Maybe even 2 weeks, let them kind of settle and get established. And then if you can, go ahead and treat them in place. Like if you have an oxalic acid vaporizer, I would go ahead and vaporize them once before you even take them out. Now, as far as putting them next to your colony, you just got to keep that in mind, right? Bees and particularly drones are going to drift from colony to colony. You know, varroa mites love drone brood. They hang out with drones all the time. So it could be a situation where, you could be introducing some potential illness or other challenge by putting them right next to it kind of on day one. Now, the other component of that is where are you moving them from? So let's just say you have a typical quarter-acre lot, right? It doesn't really matter whether you have a 20-acre lot or a quarter-acre lot. You're still kind of going to be in the same boat. A bee will forage about 5 miles plus or minus in the course of their foraging activity. If you have a swarm trap that is, say, in your backyard or maybe in the back of your property, and you take the bees out of that swarm trap and you drop them right next to your existing hives, which is great, then you're going to go back and look at that tree where the swarm trap was hanging, and there's going to be a bunch of foragers who have gone back to that tree because that's the home that they now know. There are different schools of thought here. Some people are like, cost of doing business, I'm not worried about it. I've got a queen. She can lay more eggs. It doesn't matter. I mean, the queen can lay, somewhere during the peak of the season, 1,500, maybe 2,000 eggs a day. It just kind of depends on, what their needs are, the needs of the colony, the time of year, the nectar flow and all that. But let's just say 1,500 a day. You're probably not going to see 1,500 bees that end up back on that tree. It might be more like 300 or 400, maybe 500, depending on the size of the swarm that you caught. So I would say to just go ahead and move it and be done with it. The alternative to that is you could go ahead and leave them in place and then at night close them up completely and then take them to another location, 5, 6, 7, 10, 30 miles away, and then give them a little bit of time there to basically allow those foragers that are in there to die off, and then bring them back, 20 or 30 days later, put them next to your existing colonies, and you're back in business. So that's my 2 cents there. The other question was, is anyone doing anything special when they find a queen cup during an inspection? Leave it alone, destroy it to prevent swarming. What do you do? I always leave them alone. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If the colony needs to make a swarm cell, whether it's for swarming, whether it's an emergency cell, whatever it might be, if they typically, well, I'm not going to go off on that tangent, whatever they may need it for, let's just leave it there and not worry about it. I like the idea of knowing where they are so that if I'm doing an inspection a week or 2 weeks or a month later, I can say, okay, I know that these frames in the middle all have 3 or 4 on them, and I'm going to go through and be able to find them a little bit easier. If you don't like them and they bother you or whatever it is, you can just literally just take your fingers and just pinch them shut. Just pinch right over them and you're done. Like I said, I don't worry about it because they're going to build queen cells at some point in time. I use the queen cells. When they start to get to a point where they look like they're wanting to swarm, even when you do all the right things, a lot of you who've been doing this now for a couple of years, you're seeing this firsthand. Even when you're doing everything right, the bees can still want to swarm. They have that drive to procreate and to swarm. And, having a couple of queen cells there that you can cut out and make a new colony with, that's awesome, right? It puts you a few steps ahead of the game. So I leave them alone. If you want to pinch them off and close them down and shut them down, you can absolutely do that. And the next question on the list, how do you destroy a queen cup? I think we just covered that one here. I'm just trying to see. One thing that I think is important to note is when we're talking about the queen cup is understanding why they're creating the queen cup in the first place. So if they are feeling, it's a very normal thing for them to do in the spring, regardless. You can have a colony that's got a lot of space and there's plenty of room, or one that's cramped and you're still kind of going to see them anyway. But be thinking about when you start seeing queen cells and there's multiples, particularly if you see that little, royal jelly covered larva sitting on the inside, that's when you know it's go time. That's when you really need to make a decision. When you start seeing the larva with the royal jelly at the bottom of that queen cell, that will become a queen and they will swarm and things are going down that path and you're going to need to take action and intervene. What does royal jelly look like when a queen is being made? It's kind of a weird question to kind of sort of scientifically. I guess I would say like if you took a Lubriderm lotion and like you just squirted like a pea-sized amount into your hand, it kind of has that whitish, creamy kind of look to it, semi-clear, semi-white. That's about the best I can do on that one. I will just leave that where it is. Okay, the next one. Okay, how long after painting or oiling a bee box should you wait before putting bees in it? I always use latex-based paints, like exterior-based paint. My gut kind of tells me that if it stinks to you, the bees probably aren't going to like it either. But what I did was I went out and pulled some notes from Better Bee to see what their take is on it, because they're going to know more about it than I do. The best paint for your bee boxes and woodenware is low VOC water-based exterior latex paint. VOCs, the chemicals that evaporate or off gas as the paint dries, can have negative effects on the bee's health. Paint cans disclose VOCs on the label measured in grams per liter. Under 100 is ideal, but under 50 is better. All right, hope that helps. Question 7. Is there a way to help measure population size and know if mine is where it needs to be? I get good brood patterns, but should I have a certain number of frames with brood in them? And how much does having package bees starting in the first week of May influence that goal compared to an overwintered colony? I don't know of a way to definitively measure and say, okay, if you have X, then you're in good shape. If you have so many frames of brood, so many of this, so many of that. There are a lot of variables involved. As an example, I can get package bees at my house usually by late March. A lot of people don't even see package bees until mid-May. So any time that you can get them early safely, meaning that they can make it through a cold night, they don't freeze to death, you have food available to them, the nighttime temps aren't too cold. I mean, that's the stuff you really got to pay attention to. The earlier you get them, the better in that sense. But again, it depends on where you are. You really don't want to have them die off really quickly. And you also want them to be able to forage right away. If there's no active forage where you are, there's no sense in having honeybees yet. But the bees will self-throttle. What you have to kind of watch out for is when you start late, you don't really necessarily know, like what probably drives this question. You don't really know exactly where your colony should be relative to everyone else. What I would say in those first seasons, well, with first year colonies, reach out to the bee club, reach out to a mentor, find somebody in your area and say, hey, listen, around this time of year, what do you usually see? What should I expect? When in doubt, very, very generically, I would say you need to be getting to probably like the late May, early June timeframe. And again, this varies very, very greatly depending on where you are in the world. But in like most of the US, by like early to mid June, you really need to have an entire deep completely full. You should have a bunch of bees. You should have several of those frames should be honey. Really, ideally, 2 deeps should be packed out. But again, it depends on genetics. It depends on the species and the race of the bees. It depends on location. There's so many variables involved. So I don't have a really great answer for you. What I will say is if you update your question, you say, I am in this specific location. This is when I started. What should I expect? I would say that, as an example, if you started in May where I am with a package of bees, you're way behind the 8 ball, because the bees are going to have to right away start drawing comb. They've got no drawn comb. They've got to draw a bunch of comb. The queen is laying as many eggs as she can. And then right around early to mid-June, we have a dearth. And I saw this my first few years of beekeeping, and it absolutely drove me insane because I had no idea what was going on. I would do splits in May, and I was so excited to have 2, 3, 4 colonies. Yeah, isn't this great? And then I would go outside, and I'd have these colonies that had like 1 frame of comb in them and nothing else. And they're not drawing comb anymore. And I'm like, what's going on? They've got everything they need. They're here. They've got a home. Like, what's wrong? Are they too good for their home?
Why didn't you just go home? That's your home. Are you too good for your home?
But I just didn't understand that. If there's not a flow, if there's no food coming in, they're not going to draw comb. They're not going to lay eggs, and the colony's ultimately going to fail. That's where you're going to have to intervene with a combination of supplements, whether it's sugar syrup, you may have pollen patties, you may make your own pollen patties using, pollen substitute. Whatever path you take, you're probably going to have to intervene in some way to help them out. I know it was a long-winded answer. I hope that covered it. But as always, man, just hit me up. Let me know if I didn't answer the question. Okay, I have a thing here that I've labeled as a general statement, but I wanted to bring this back up. It's from our Discord room. There was some potential inspection confusion that I wanted to clear up. One of our listeners during an inspection was not inspecting the brood box, and their explanation was, quote, the brood box is their space. I 100% agree that as it relates to honey, we need to have boundaries as to how much we're going to take and how much we should always set aside for the bees. I get it. It makes perfect sense. And then from there, maybe you have a queen excluder on or you have other resources above that. But from that point up, whether it's, again, queen excluder and then supers or however you work it out, that's the stuff that you can start looking at taking if it makes sense based on the time of year and your area. However, as it relates to inspections, you need to inspect everything that is basically above the ground and below the outer cover. I'm not saying that you need to look at everything every time, but the brood chamber is the most important area of the colony. That's where the queen's likely to be found. That's where the next generation of bees are being raised. And, unfortunately, that's where we find a lot of disease and illness. So you absolutely, positively have to inspect the brood chamber. If you're going to skip anything, skip the honey. That's what I would say. I mean, obviously you want to take a peek at everything that's in there, but I mean, you can skip a honey super if you know it's a honey super. The bees are guarding it. They're watching it. No big deal. And I want to make sure this is not in any way, shape, or form meant to be critical or tough on this guy. He's a super good dude. He participates in the Discord room all the time. I like him a lot. It's a learning process. There are a ton of moving parts. And this is just, one more thing we need to know, we need to be thinking about. So obviously, you're trying to take in all this stuff as a new beekeeper and things overlap and it gets confusing. So I 100% get it. But just make sure that you're inspecting everything. All right, next question. Aside from asking local beekeepers, is there a good way to visually tell when the nectar flow is flowing versus not, or when the dearth has set in? Activity level in front of the hive, bees coming in and going. Sorry, I misread that for a second. Typically here, I think the dearth starts in July, but we've had a heat wave and no rain in the last week. Still see bees on the clover, and they're still very active. I'm trying to decide whether to add a super or chill out. So I would say that let's start from the top here. Is there a good way to visually check when the nectar flow is flowing or not, or when the dearth has set in? The frames are going to give you the answers. The frames give you the answers you seek. But if you're looking, for example, you can look outside and you can watch bees coming in and out, but that doesn't really give you the best measure because you may see 1 out of every 3 bees comes in and they're loaded up with pollen. And you're thinking, oh, well, that's great. They've got tons of pollen. The pollen sacs are loaded down. Everything's in good shape. We're good. But they may be bringing in just a little bit of pollen. It may be the others may be bringing in some nectar that you just don't see, but you don't really get a good idea of the balance of the resources coming in. When you look at the frames, you'll see the brood section is going to be in the middle, and then you'll see this little layer of kind of like some pollen, and then you'll have maybe potentially some like a line that goes between the pollen and some nectar, maybe some capped honey around the edges. So you can see what they're bringing in and what they're storing, for one. And two, look at the size of that brood chamber. Right now, I've talked about it several times lately because I actually have some bees here at the house that I get to play around with. But there is a nuke on my back porch, and they've got a frame and a half of open brood right now. And some of it, well, it's a combination of open and capped brood right now. And that's a really small colony that's kind of ramping up, but they're still producing a lot. They have resources coming in that they're using to raise and rear new brood. But to visually tell, really, you're looking at how big of a brood chamber do I still have? How many eggs is the queen laying? Because we kind of don't know that, right? The colony and the workers are going to throttle that queen based on the needs of the colony. The queen will just keep laying all the time, and the workers will come through and be like, nope, not raising that one up. Gobble, gobble, eat it up, and then they're done. So keep an eye on what's on the frames. Keep an eye on how many resources are around, how much open brood, how much capped, all those things. And what will typically happen is I know it's like in the spring, frame after frame after frame is eggs, larvae, open brood, closed brood, and it's all over the place, just completely packed in. As it gets later in the season, like my dearth should be going on right around now. I mean, it really should have been going on for a couple of weeks, but I've still had some flow. We've got a lot of pollen, a lot of resources still coming into the hives, which is great. But by this time of year, typically, they don't have anything coming in. And you'll see that in the frames. There's the part of that, too, was about asking local beekeepers, right? You can always, again, check with the club, check with somebody you know, and see what they're experiencing and what they're seeing. Oh, and the last part of that, trying to decide whether to add a super or chill out. For the most part, in a lot of the country, and again, it depends on where you are, but in a lot of the country in the U.S., swarm season is over, right? So you can pretty much be confident that they're making use of all the space that's still inside the hive that was once being used for brood. Now they may be putting some nectar and some honey in there, and they're not really in swarm mode right now. So unless they are completely packed and they're busting at the seams and they are bearding a lot on hot days, I wouldn't necessarily worry about adding in a honey super. Now, it won't hurt where if you are getting a lot of bearding and it's really, really hot where you are in the summertime, adding that little bit of extra space on the top for the ventilation alone and giving bees more room to move around, that's not going to hurt. What I will say is if you have that extra honey super on there, just try not to fill it with a bunch of drawn comb. That way, in the unlikely event that a single wax moth gets up there and finds that drawn comb, they're not going through and destroying the whole thing. You can find one frame that got messed up, yank it out, and be back in business. Question number 9 here. I have a hive filling out frames 9 and 10 with the flow coming to an end. Add another box or no? This actually ties into kind of what we just said, and I'll say the same thing again. Right? I wouldn't add another box at this point. I think you're almost over with the flow anyway, unless you need it for some extra ventilation or a little bit of heat. A little bit of cooling, a little bit of airflow. Unless that's the case, I wouldn't worry about adding in another one. You can always move one of those frames to the middle on the outside and see if they do something with it. But again, they're not drawing comb if there's no flow or they don't have resources coming in. And let's see what we got on the next one here. I've only got one question left here on the list. If I still have outside empty frames, some with comb, some without, in my brood boxes, but great brood patterns in the middle frames, is it worth checkerboarding them to get the bees to draw them out and start getting them up to speed more quickly? So I've said it before, and I guess I'll say it again. I'm not a huge checkerboarding fan. I think that it makes sense to say, okay, they are not moving outwards. I want to take one frame from the outside, get that in the middle, and have them draw that up. And then when they draw that one up, and I'm doing an inspection again the next week, I'll go ahead and do the same thing again. Or if it's early and it's during a flow, doing 2 of those, maybe one of them in position 5 and one in position 7 as an example on a 10 frame deep. Yeah, I think that might be okay. You're going to try checkerboarding every single one of them. The bees put all the resources kind of where they want them to be. And when you go in there and you start moving things around, then they're on one frame and then they got to kind of walk over it and get to the next frame to get the resources they need. And then they got to walk back, and it's a lot of extra walking around that I don't think that really benefits them in any way. And you're trying to get them to draw comb, but you got to remember, if the resources aren't coming in, they're not going to draw comb, period. They draw comb to put things in the comb. If they don't have things to put in the comb, they don't draw the comb. So hopefully that helps. Well, folks, that's all I've got for today on this episode of the Bee Buzz. We had an interview teed up that fell through, so that's why this is a little bit late. I was actually going to release that earlier today. So I will be back on the regular schedule. We're still going to reach out. It's my fault here. I got to follow up with Randy Oliver, but he and I spoke by email about a week or 2 ago. I think maybe 2 weeks ago. So we're going to have him on very shortly. I'm looking forward to having a discussion with him. I affectionately refer to him as the modern godfather of beekeeping. So we're really pumped up to get him on. But that's all that I've got. So be kind to one another, stay safe, and remember, I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Take care.